Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And this is Ben.
on Spoiled Rotten.
Oh, that shelf.
All right. Well,
Episode 5.
yeah, we are doing Moon Knight, episode 5, Asylum.
Yes.
Well, it starts with a beat up. I'm going to say Mark. I know there's stuff out there saying that this is Jake or a third alter we haven't met yet. This is part of the reason I don't like the comics, because you're like, oh yeah, nothing is for certain, everything's in question. However, I am taking this from someone tweeted at the director Mohammed Diab, and they said, can you confirm the theory that this is Jake? All he said was no. That doesn't mean that he's saying it's not Jake, but but he could just be saying, I'm not going to confirm the theory. My problem is, if you're not going to confirm one way or the other, the episode is weird because we only have one episode left. Or are we going to shift again and just start talking about Jake then? Otherwise, you're kind of just throwing Jake in there without any commentary.
Right. At this point, I feel like Jake is going to be the post-credit thing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think,
which I'm at this point, I'm better off with that. Being like, oh, there's hints of a third alter and all that kind of stuff. Because as the episode progresses, you're like, okay, depending on what they end up doing in the next episode with one of the bigger characters in this series, you're like, okay, it makes sense for them to reveal another alter for another series, or another season, or to keep the gates open for that, right? So it's kind of interesting. I don't hate it so much at this point, but it is annoying still. I agree, because knowing as much as we do, and you knowing much more than I do.
Anyway, so I agree that his physicality is different. Also, why does he have those bruises? We didn't see Mark get beat up or anything, and we see Mark again without the bruises. So it makes sense it's a third. I just think more needed to be done if they were planting their flag for the third being on screen for the first time like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, the voice sounded a bit different to me, but it sounded
thing.
Yeah, it sounded a bit
no doubt about it. Yeah,
but it to me, it's like,
even though he moves his mouth, everything about him is different. I'm just saying, we
have confirmation of it now on screen. We just don't have a name. Is basically my theory for it.
Well,
There's enough.
We have confirmation.
I think
feel like it's there.
I think
we're getting that from. Well,
I think we have enough. Or
you can make an assumption. I don't think that's confirmation.
I think it's a educated guess.
Yeah,
at this point,
not confirmation.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough. You're absolutely right. Until we get the name, it's not a confirmation, but it does seem to be very clear that they're going that direction.
What I would say is the show, if we know anything about it, and we've talked about this before, has given us visual cues as to know when we're dealing with something else, like a different alter. And even we have discussed and debated about how that actually plays out. So it's not like it's set in stone. It's kind of what I was complaining about last episode, is I can't grab onto anything in this. There is no actual concrete way of being like, well, we know this is happening because the show taught us to watch it like this. Everything is constantly changing, but nothing was done to highlight this is a new alter in this. Right. Yes, his acting is different, 100%. But if I'm going on how shows usually work and how we can say the MCU shows were working before, in order for this to kind of land for me, I mean, it's obviously working for other people. It needs to stick to the language that it sets up for you. Okay. Otherwise, that's why I push back so hard about we've got confirmation. It's kind of like, I don't know what the show's doing. everything that we kind of hold on to was like, well, we know he's shifting because the eyes roll and they do this. They're like, well, we're throwing that out for this scene, and like everything is like, it's kind of like the English language, like, yeah, there's these rules, but then every rule has an exception, and there's like multiple exceptions. It's kind of like, well, then what are we? I don't know, man. This is
no, I agree with you. Just make Y a vowel. I completely agree with you.
Exactly. That is what I'm saying. They haven't just made Y a vowel.
It's so stupid.
Sometimes Y is this show. It's like and I understand that people might like that because they're like, and that's how it feels or whatever, and like putting in some mindset. I'm like, sure. That's all I can say is then sure. I mean, that's what they're doing. Cool.
That is one perspective that I played around with. It kicked around in my head a lot. Is like, what if the brilliance of this show is like the fact that it forces us to have one central protagonist, but that protagonist has the ID, and basically we're receiving 3 different shows and 3 different perspectives and all that kind of stuff, and it does clutter everything. It makes it so confusing. But once we have those visual confirmations, the audio ones, the like even what he's doing differently with his face and all that kind of stuff, those things are enough for me to be like, that's another altar that has not been named yet. That's just enough. I don't think I need more from it, right? If we can go with other shows like Downton Abbey, where people are like, oh, did you see that lip quiver? Did you see that? Oh, damn. And I'm like, okay, if we're leaning into that, then I could lean into this being like, yeah, he's got tape on his nose, right? He's got a little bit of a New York accent thing going on there. So I could be like, that's another character. We haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
There's enough for me to do that.
As I said, your Downton Abbey example is people knowing how the show disseminates its information, and
which
being
is
like,
fair.
That lip quiver, because the whole thing is everyone's so measured and no one does extreme. So yeah, that lip quiver speaks volumes. I can't do that with the show. I'm glad other people get it.
Yeah.
For me, I'm just like, I don't know. Everything is up for debate, and that's not what works for me.
And that's kind of why I say like 3 separate shows, right? You have Mark's show, which is like a Merc, and then you have the Steven show, which is of course the gift shop museum guy. And then we have the third unknown show that we were like, oh, this doesn't kind of fit in right now. This kind of doesn't feel so good. Like, this is a totally different camera angle. Everything is different about who I'm going to just say is Jake right now with the tape on his nose. Like, every single time I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's Jake. Okay, cool. That makes sense. I was just good with that. I just didn't need a diagnose right now.
I'm glad it works for you. I feel like you're being,
but I get why it's
forgiving. I think you're being very forgiving, and that's good of you.
That's fair. Yeah. But I feel like people were being more forgiving to Hawkeye than to this.
Yeah, but that's not us.
That's true. That's true. Well, okay, because this episode hit me in the feels so hard.
Yeah,
it just blindsided.
It is a good episode of television. I don't know if it's a good episode of the show Moon Knight.
It is the most cohesive episode so far to me.
I think it was very clear what they were doing with it. It's the same as the WandaVision episode where they're going through her past.
Yes,
very clear what's happening. So yes, I agree with you on that. I don't know if it fits with the rest of the show. I think that's what I'll say. I agree with you that it is a very strong episode of TV. I don't know if it fits with everything else we've been doing.
I agree with what you're saying, because like I was thinking about that with the WandaVision comparison. That with Wanda, we really got to go hit to hit with her grief. In this, because it's a brand new character, it's like we're being told the highlight reel, and that's really depressing of its trauma, right? It's like, here's everything that happened within this series, and then here's other things that happened in like to really bring up the trauma aspect of it. Like, we got more of Wanda's stuff in her highlight reel of her trauma in that episode with Agatha, right? And this one, it was very, very effectively done the same thing. It pulled together so many things for me that were like question marks about what is this series about. Now it actually fully kind of makes sense to me. It really does.
Disagree with that, but
really,
we'll yeah.
Okay.
We'll yeah. There. Yeah. So basically Harrow is there with, if you want to say it's the third alter, he's trying to convince this third alter that basically everything that we saw in episodes 1 through 4, including seeing, I want to say it's Tawedit. That's how I feel Steven says it, but I feel like every content creator has said it differently. But the fertility god, everything didn't happen, that he's in Chicago and that's just where he is.
Yeah.
And then it gets pretty rough because Bobby and Billy come back and inject him with something that's stuff I don't like.
A good old neck injection.
Yeah,
there's
stuff
something
that looks fake, obviously. Like it's like that's not a real syringe. Not again. There's certain visual things where I'm like, I don't know if they're going, like, I can just assume they're going for, clearly this isn't real, but to me that was already triggered with the tape on his nose. I'm like, well, we never saw what led to that, so I don't know what's going on here. But again, if we're going along with it just on face value, yeah, like you can see there. I think people have even pointed out, oh no, this is later with Steven, so we'll get there, but stuff in the office isn't even complete, so it's like obviously not really happening.
It definitely does seem like a different perspective. I would have, so one thing I would have liked as another visual cue, to tie it back to the shackle on the bed thing, right? Where if he was shackled up his leg to the chair or something like that in that scene, so that it would just kind of be like, okay, there's a reason why he has this thing on his nose. It's a real like hit or whatever it is. And then it's like a different reality. We have to figure that out. But it's just like this another kind of cool throwback. But yeah, you're right. The Office, I was like, wait, The Office looks completely different. Things are moved around. Things are misting. It's weird. It's a different orientation entirely.
And then we get pulled back to the end of episode 4 where Tawedit confirms to Mark and Steven they're dead. And basically on a timeout in the Duat Egyptian underworld, she explains there's many versions of this. This is the underworld. This is this is an underworld.
What did she say? Because I thought that was such a brilliant piece of dialogue that they threw in there. Like so many infinite, untethered streams of unconsciousness or something like that.
I don't know.
It was absolutely beautiful. The way they tied it together, I was like, okay, that is really, really reassuring. It's just really well written from the whole. This is why you're projecting a psychiatric ward. Have you seen like the ancestral plane, like from Black Panther? Like, oh, like it's so crazy how they're like, yeah, it's just the afterlife, and it's the way they called it. It was such a cool thing. You didn't like that,
man? I think the very idea of what's going on in this afterlife is what rubs me the wrong way about this. So
interesting.
She says, yeah, like it's what Harrow said already. Like it's all about perception, right? So like,
yes,
to me, a pen is a writing utensil. To my dog, and so this is an afterlife. So you're experiencing it like this mental hospital, which Steven's like, why? And Mark's like, because we're crazy. I'm like, but like, yeah, you've had trauma, but like, is that how you want to identify it, as you're crazy and insane, and then just leave it on that? I don't like, and again, we don't have enough information to know if this is a hospital he's been to. Yes, you can make assumptions, obviously, but the way this show works is everything is up for debate. So I can't, I'm not able to make the assumption that, yeah, he went to one. If we're going on what we saw, there is no point where he goes to a mental institution. So what is he basing this off of? Again, just based off of his memories. It's him being very upset at home, rightfully so, and then moving out as a teenager. And we know he said he went into the army, so maybe that's where he goes to the army and then becomes a merc after. But there is no medical intervention where he would have this view. So no, I don't know what that is. And then,
well, my thing there is, does it have to be real or does it have to be perceived? Because all you really need to think of is, because my point is this: Mark being like, it's because we're crazy. I think that afterlife must have to resemble someplace that's safe. And knowing, like, through this episode, obviously no part of his life was safe. So what part of his life would feel safe is the idea that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone anymore, that he'd be able to support it and not alone, right? So mental hospital
I mean,
projection makes sense to me.
Nothing about that seems like he's calm or like feeling safe. He's constantly on edge. As Mark,
Right.
He's constantly. It's actually Steven who seems the most at peace there because he feels like I actually know what's going on here. Mark is the one that's like, what's going on here? What are you doing to me? What? No. Well, and we see, or if you want to say it was Jake, but I say that is Mark. You constantly see him get injected because he's constantly not safe in this place.
Correct. But what I'm seeing through this whole episode is that he knows what's happening, and through his trauma, he's resisting accepting that information, right? The same way he's accepting all these different things. I'm resisting being dead. I'm doing this and all this kind of stuff. Like the last episode is like Steven was like, yeah, we were shot, right? Yeah, we were shot. Okay, cool. Like Steven brings it up first. Mark doesn't want to deal with these realities.
Mark brings it up first.
Mark brings it up first.
Mark's like, what's the last thing you remember? Hoping he says we got shot, and then Steven says we got shot. And he's like, great, thank you. I'm not losing it.
Right. Okay. So even then, my point here is that through this whole episode, we're showing that Mark does anything to prevent dealing with the truth because the truth is so hard to accept, right? So to me, it's not out of character for Mark to continue to accept these things, and then Steven does, because Steven can accept certain things that Mark can't. Right. So it makes sense to me that he's pushing back in this.
No, because Steven's the one that is constantly put at a disadvantage because everything is kept from him. And the whole point is Steven can't deal with it. And even if you're saying that like he doesn't get to see what happened. And that is part of the breaking point. Right. Is that Steven sees the beginning of, oh, my mom beat us. And then he even gets pulled out of that. And the whole point is, you can't see that. That's not for you. Again, you can make an assumption that maybe he could deal with it. But the whole point was he is the out. So he doesn't know. All of it is he has rosy memories.
Right. What I'm saying is that Steven is there to basically flip the switch, right? But Mark knows about everything, but Mark will prevent dealing with it. He goes to Steven to be safe. He prevents.
We'll get there, but even that I'm confused on because we see the switch to Steven, like, oh, better clean up before mom sees this, and then he gets beat. So how would he not, unless they're saying there's another switch before he gets beat, so Steven doesn't see that. But even there, it's Steven knowing like we better clean up or something bad will happen with mom. So I'm not even there. They're muddying the waters about what. Again, it's stated what his purpose is, and we as adults understand what his purpose is, but what they showed was different, and I feel like that's confusing as well, which is he switches to Steven when he's about to get beat. So how would Steven not have memories about being beat unless he switched back and Steven's just that like intermediary part with still understanding like something bad is about to happen if we don't clean up.
The logic of what you're saying makes sense to me. It makes complete sense. And I get why you're pushing back on it. But to me, I'm like, I
think you just want to enjoy it, and that's fine.
It's like, not that I want to enjoy it. I do enjoy it heavily. But the thing is, I think that maybe I am giving it too much artistic talent of everything by saying like, oh, it's 3 different protagonists in one person's body, and that's why we're all mixed up, right? But what you're saying with the switch makes total sense too. If the first time he switched, it was to Steven, it's Steven can take on anything or whatever it is. Like when they like, if all he's basing it off is that little tagline in the movie poster, right? When danger is near, or
Steven doesn't fear or whatever.
Stephen Grant doesn't fear or something like that, right? You're right, absolutely, that Steven was made up, but I don't know why Steven wouldn't remember in that situation. So
this is what I was saying. Like, there's a bunch of great ideas that can't, or they're going to save it all for the 6th episode. But what I would say is this was a great pilot for another TV show. Because most of the time I'm watching this, I'm like, why were we like? I don't even need Moon Knight to show up in this because this is such a interesting thing. It works for WandaVision because we already had a bunch of movies with her, and now you feel like you're expanding. But for this to be the first, not this episode, but for this season to be the first time we're meeting Moon Knight, and you want to do everything that you did with WandaVision, in 6 episodes.
Mhm.
WandaVision was more than 6 episodes. Like what I'm
It was
not
8,
sure
right?
that
Yeah.
I think they're trying a lot of stuff, and I'm agreeing with you. This is a good episode, but I saw this as like a good pilot for a different show.
Mm.
Because it's obvious, like when they're like, we haven't even got past the first scene, but like it's so obvious that like, oh, the souls are dropping down Harrow's. I'm like, who the fuck cares? Like, I don't care at this point about Harrow, like, and like prejudging people and they're going down to the duo. Like, we're dealing with this thing, and
It's very
these
true.
points, like these points are the important things of like, if we're going to the lengths of exploring a character with DID, I'm not interested in being like, yeah, okay, we had our episode about it, and now we're gonna go back and punch some guys. Like I'm not sure that those two, and that's what I said before the show even started, was I don't know how those two things harmonize. They don't, to me. Is Marvel punch them up and then actually exploring a very real thing of DID. It's not a metaphor. It's not anything. It is a very real thing that people deal with. And I feel like it's going to be like, okay, you got that part, and now let's go back to this, which doesn't make sense to me in 6 episodes.
So, well, you're absolutely right. It will not make sense in 6 episodes, but at the heart of everything, they have to still tell a comic book story, right? That's where it gets muddied up. It's not a show genuinely about
but comic book stories aren't about punching and stuff. Like, they're always,
I understand, but what I'm saying is it's about character development, it's about world building, it's about all those different things. It's not genuinely about DID. It can't be. But what they're trying to do, I agree. Seeing that scene again, you're like, wait, that doesn't fully make sense. Okay, yeah, I can accept that for this episode. A knock, because that's something I didn't see. Whether or not that's something that needs to make sense to me is entirely different, because the interesting thing is, the few people I've talked to about this, about how they look at it from a mental health perspective, being professionals as well as some of their patients and all that kind of stuff with DID, is ultimately, the goal is, this episode is true to the goal of treatment to DID, right? In many senses of that form. So it's very hard, because it's like, what they're doing here is more accurate to how people treat DID, or how DID is treated, rather than what DID it's like to be experienced. Because the people that their patients are like, yeah, that's kind of similar, but then these things are not, and that's everyone else's kind of experience, right? But I can see now how this is written from more of a clinical treatment standpoint of DID than actually exploring what DID is like, except for those first few episodes, with the first 2 episodes with Steven.
And I think I guess we're just not going to get through this. My other issue with it is, so the next scene is Taweret being like, here, like, I got to take your hearts, and let's balance them. To me, I'm like, okay, yeah, that is going along with what the Lemire run did, and what I'm assuming you're getting at with how to treat DID, which is, it all has to be explored. You can't try and silo off everything.
Yes.
The issue with that I see is, even in the way you worded it, is treat, not cure.
Yes.
Because I would imagine the idea is there is trauma to be explored and to heal from, but I don't think people look at it as, I need to be cured from DID. It's treatment. And so to end this on Steven falls off the boat, all right, you're balanced now, we can go, that seems like a betrayal of what the actual exploration of this would be.
That's very well put.
Yeah. So because the Lemire run isn't that. The Lemire run is everybody works together, all of the alters work together, and that's when they find. And even in that, when you read that, it still is like, well, did any of this really happen? And the character's like, it doesn't matter, because I found a way to harmonize all these alters and actually explore everything that went through to these alters coming to existence. And so the win isn't you beat the bad guy, it's you have found a moment of peace with this and actually acknowledged everything that's happened. Not we got rid of Steven, great, because we don't need him anymore. Or like I think that is a betrayal. That is why I don't think this worked the way you set it up to work. And maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it feels like earlier on.
No, you're right.
I think that that moment kind of solidified it from you, where he fell off and she's like, okay, good, you're healed. They might explain in episode 6 that this was all someone else manipulating him and making him feel like that's what needs to happen,
which I hope,
but that's not not what the episode showed us. And again, this goes to what I said at the very beginning. Movies, shows, even bodies of music teach you how to interact with them. I'm having a hard time being like, well, how do I interact with this? Because so many things along the way feel like they're betraying what they're setting up.
That's a very, very valid point that I've not considered. If the goal of treatment, not cure, is to harmonize, then yeah, you're right that the scales balancing is a betrayal to that entirely. It's as well as setting up the idea that there's a third altar, and in the afterlife, them not being able to actually weigh that out
him and like actually, because I'm thinking like, oh, that's Jake outside, but
they have to.
But then they're like, no, that was Mark. He just didn't want to go inside. And again, if that was Jake, they didn't connect it to the guy at the beginning. Like, I'm just using Jake because in the comics we know that is a third altar, but it doesn't really matter if it's not Jake. The point is, we have dealt with 2 altars, or we have dealt with Mark and Steven. I'll say it that way. There is a third altar, and I feel like the show has hinted at that with I didn't do it, third sarcophagus shaking, and maybe you're right, and that was a third altar at the beginning, but they are not tying that in, so it's just this thing hovering. And I think last he said maybe he's not ready to deal with it, and I'm like, but that's not the point of what we're doing then, especially if you're dealing with what you said, which I think is right, which is this is written more of like how to treat the idea and less about how to explore, like how to experience it. It's more how you're treating it, and they are purposefully being like, we're not ready for that yet, and then still giving him that. And I understand that people are like, well, no, Mark won't want that. Mark is going to want to get out of the field of reeds. But it's like, but still, the point being, if we were using this as an extended metaphor for treatment, why would he go to the field of reeds once he ignores completely an altar and then another altar just drops off the boat and dies?
Yeah, because you would think at that point, balancing the scales, like you're in the afterlife, all truths are there, right? All truths. So then you would have doors that would automatically open to Jake's perspective, right? And be like, hey, what was this? What was this? And then they have to go back to that door and open the sarcophagus. Now, we're assuming that Jake is in the sarcophagus, right? That's what we're assuming.
Well, we're assuming a third.
To be
altar.
fair,
yes, we're using Jake as just a placeholder.
Right.
We're just assuming. There's.
I agree. Yeah. But what I in the previous episode, I think 4, when they opened the door, it was just Steven that just like came out immediately, not in the sarcophagus, right? Am I remembering that incorrectly?
No, he says, "Let me out," and then
he's in the sarcophagus, or no?
He gets him out the sarcophagus. Yeah.
Okay. All right, then never mind. I forgot entirely about the sarcophagus thing. But yeah, it's weird to me that he would be, because like Amit has that power to like judge past, future, and present and sees all, right? So you'd think that all gods would see all in this situation, or no, not Tawit, if that's what we're saying. Yeah, this episode's more confusing than anything. You know what it is about this episode, and I think we got to get there, is the actual trauma that he goes through and how much that like really scarily connected with me.
Well, we'll see over the whole they're on the boat when Mark is trying to be like, whatever, I'll walk out of this, and then they're on the boat. And he's like, oh, let's kill her and steal the boat. So they go back in, and Steven initially goes into a room filled with everyone that Mark has killed. And that's when they see Mark's brother Roro. I can't remember his actual name, but they call him Roro. And that's what leads into the memory of the happy family at the barbecue, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, we're not going to eat now, we're going to go off and play in the cave. And yeah, it is a very harrowing experience of like watching Steven try to save Mark's little brother. Well, he's trying to save both of them, but we cut right to them sitting Shiva for the death of Roro. And that leads to the mother being like, what are you doing here, to Mark, and saying this is all your fault. Rough stuff. Very rough stuff.
Yeah.
I think this is the strong stuff. I think it's strong because it is based in stuff people can understand and feels universal. Like you don't have to know what sitting Shiva is. You don't need to know like the details. You understand the feeling of, and also you don't have to have been there when your brother died, but you can understand the guilt that Mark would feel. You can understand the grief that everyone feels in that all is understanding. And I think that's the strong stuff. All that other stuff where they're trying to do, where they're like, is it this, is it that? That's where this show falls apart for me. I think because there is still, again, there's still room for metaphor in here, there's still room to be artistic, but it is something that everyone can have access to and engage with right away. It doesn't feel like they're trying to trick you into feeling a certain way.
I do have to agree with you on this. You fully convinced me, because it's these few scenes, the trauma scenes, the abuse scenes and everything like that. It's the origin scenes that it seems like they really threw all of their attention in there. But you're right, the other stuff where you're like, ironically, it's unbalanced. This whole episode's about balancing scales. The writing there's unbalanced in the sense where the main narrative, I wouldn't even say the side quest, because this is the full quest. It's like, you have to re-explore these things, you have to balance the scales before we get there, right? So the main quest here, in the sense, it's just it makes more sense than the arrival of the thing. But luckily, we know there's a full episode. So the arrival there is just the end of the episode, which could be like why we're so unsatisfied. To your point, again, how we hate that this is like, oh, if this is seen as a full movie, then you're giving it to us in 1 hour increments. This sucks. Because you're leaving us on such a big, dumb cliffhanger now in retrospect. I have to say, you're right. It just against what DID treatment's all about.
Yeah.
I hate that you pointed out that logical conclusion to me.
As I said, I like the episode as like in a vacuum. Like if I just watched this, I didn't really need to see anything else before this to think that this was a very good episode. I think this works on its own. There isn't like, you can understand the concepts that are at play. Like they even show you when he becomes Moon Knight for the first time. So like if you're like, what the fuck's a Khonshu? You're like, all right, that's it right there. Like I can see it. I think this is my frustration with the season in general, is like everything feels like we're starting over every time. Pretty much. Every time it feels like, okay, which worked on a show like The Good Place for me, but that felt way more cohesive. Like I understood what they were getting at. So anytime they pulled the rug, I was like, oh shit, that's more fun. Or like, oh, like how's it gonna get out of this? This is just like, oh, so this isn't the adventure show. This isn't, and going into it, I already knew that. Obviously, that's what I was saying. Like reading the comics didn't make me that excited for this, because I know it can't be, oh, Moon Knight's the Batman of Marvel. It's gonna be sick when he like it's like, that's not going to be the part, and like it's gonna feel like we're kind of wasting time if we deal with that stuff. In my opinion, now that we're here and you can kind of see the meat of what a Moon Knight story would be, I didn't want to like ruin that part for you, but it's like, this is the stuff you would deal with, right? Like, and it feels like this is more meaningful to like explore than whether or not he like stops Harrow, because like
you're right, I don't care about Harrow at all at this point.
I understand it's like, oh, killing people, it's like, but as an idea for a TV show to explore something, this does feel like, if not new, like still fresh and like interesting to explore. And I don't know that you can just do it service in this one episode. And I think that if we continue, I'll probably be happy if we continue in this. But I don't think that has been the way any of, even the ones I like, any of these Marvel Disney Plus shows have worked. The last shows are the big fight. And so we're going to have to leave this and go back to the big fight. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think people will like it if I'm wrong, but I do hope I'm wrong about that.
I don't think you're going to be wrong. You're going to be entirely right. I think the stuff with Harrow right now is just, it's not actually the afterlife. Actually the stuff with Harrow right now is his avatar as Amit or whatever, balancing the scales for Mark to judge him to get in the afterlife or something like that. Maybe, I don't know, but
no, because he's already dead.
No, he's already dead.
Yeah,
they already killed him. That's not a thing. He already been judged, and he just judged him with a bullet, or two.
It was two. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, he's got to get back right now. He's got to get reestablished with Khonshu, which I'm glad they did point out the fact that it's like, hey, Khonshu straight up manipulated you, bro.
So my thing is, I've seen people say it two ways, like think that it's two ways of manipulation. I think because I read the comments, a lot of the things people have been like, oh my goodness, what a revelation. Like, this seemed obvious from the beginning. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on here. Like, and that may just because I read the comics. But so to me, the only way him asserting he took advantage of you is the fact that Khonshu says, your brain is broken or something like that. But I've also seen people be like, no, it's because he was trying to bargain with a dying man. I'm like, but that's a lot of superhero lore. I'm not like every superhero origin, but a lot of it is like this bargain you make to like essentially kill off what you used to be to like to come back as this hero. Like that is the idea. So I'm not sure like what the big betrayal is, other than specifically what Harrow brought up which was, did he take you because you were already broken, or did taking him on break you? That is the only thing that makes sense to me. But the whole like, oh well, he's talking to a dying man and taking advantage of him, like I don't know, if someone was like, hey, you can live if you just do this thing, I wouldn't feel taken advantage of. I'd be like, great, I don't want to die. Let me think about it.
I see what you're saying. I totally do. I believe it is manipulation, because he's just doing all these things, and
but I don't know what
because he has
these things are. He says one specific thing, and he's like, I'll do it.
I see what you're saying. I think
the taking advantage is him stating ahead of time, oh, your brain is broken, so I can do whatever I want once you make this deal. I think that is taking advantage of him 100%.
Yeah, but
I'm kind of like, what?
It's weird that he would say that out loud, right? It's weird that he would be like, oh, this is something that would be cool. Now, like, continue. Now, shake my hand. Do it. Shake my hand on 3. 1, 2. Shake my hand. Come on. It's like, it's so funny. But I feel it's a bit manipulative. I really do, because he has the power to just heal him straight up, and then he's like, no, but you got to do this. Like, this is my one thing. Like, obviously, Khonshu had the ability to communicate with other people too. He's been waiting around for, like, let's say thousands of years. So he can wait a few more, it
wouldn't be
weeks,
thousands of years, because Harrow is one of his avatars. So it's not like,
that's interesting. How did Harrow put Khonshu back in the thing?
This is what I'm saying. Like, it hasn't been thousands of years. It's been very recently he had an avatar. Harrow's
You're absolutely right.
That's
why I feel it's more manipulative. I feel it is manipulative. He's not dying to get out. He got out recently.
I struggle with that, because then I feel like what you're doing, not you specifically,
not me, no,
to accept that the bargain that's made is the manipulation. And that it's like this terrible thing is to like kind of reject a whole section of storytelling. Like, it's like that's the inciting incident for a lot of things. Is like, I'm not quite sure. It's why I had an issue with everyone being like, oh, but Hawkeye's this killer and he needs to atone for it. I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, that's not like what?
Okay, that's a good point. I gotta marinate that a little bit.
It's like, fine, that's a manipulation, but it's also just what we accept to go on these stories. I think my reaction is more like, why is everyone so like clutching their pearls about this specific one if it isn't just tied to the fact that he is also acknowledging I can manipulate you because of your broken mind.
Everyone's pearl clutching, and I love that term so much. Everyone's pearl clutching because he straight up has DID
because he made a bargain with a dying person. No,
that's
not the DID. It's I only understand it if it is about his DID. I think people are separating it and saying like, oh, it's what you said, like, well, he's dying
about the dying,
saved him, and I'm like, what? That is just a thing in storytelling.
I get that, but I mean, it's always felt a little off to me. It always has just felt a little. Here's the thing.
So this isn't me doing a judgment and saying no, it's okay because we do it. I'm saying, do you feel that way every time it comes up in the story? Because I haven't heard anyone.
Here's the weird part about it. And every other time, it usually happens, and the guy ends up redeeming himself alongside accepting it. So you're like, okay, you used to be a dick, and now you're like a lot better now that because you have the powers too. Cool. Like we like this version of you now. Cool. In every other version, it's been like that. Now it's been like, oh, okay, this guy straight up has DID. You're calling that out as a part of the this is a silver lining. It's a weird thing.
So what I would say is it's still more the DID thing. Then it isn't.
It is more the DID thing,
and I accept that. But I just think it's weird when people only talk about, well, he was bargaining with a dying man. It's like.
Yeah, I don't find any issue with that.
Yeah, that's a thing. It's only upsetting when you realize that he pointed out ahead of time.
Yeah.
Oh, good, your brain is broken.
Yeah. Yeah. The unwritten rules part of that would suck about it. Like, oh yeah, you're dying. I can bring you back, but you're gonna remember all the people you killed. That's gonna suck on you a little bit. But yeah. I hear you. That part is not so manipulative. It is the DID thing that it feels much more manipulative.
So then we get to the part where they're like, yeah, put us back in our body and get Layla to release conscious so we can save all these souls. We don't care about this. I'm skipping over it.
Yeah, we don't care about that at all.
Steven is the one that's like, we have to balance these scales, so they go back, and this is where we kind of see
we see one of the most difficult scenes,
right, where he's like, I don't want to
ever.
He gets pulled back to her and him. So this is obviously Mark this time. It's not a potential anything else. And I don't remember how they transitioned from this to Steven finally seeing that the mom would beat Mark.
Doesn't Mark go like, all right, I'll show you, or something like that?
I don't remember.
Doesn't he just stop fighting against it? Because he's like, because I do remember like Stephen being like, you have to show me. It's like, no,
I think Stephen's there on his own. That's why Mark comes in and pulls him out.
Right.
He
locks Mark out.
Right.
That's what he does. He locks Mark out of the room. Just
I'm just saying, I don't remember the transition from heroin Mark in that reality. I know people have kind of seen this as Inception, which makes more sense to me than that's a third alter, which is there's a reality where Mark is beat up in the thing, and then there's the one where he's not, or maybe that one's above. But either way, there's levels, and the level where Mark and Stephen actually interact together is a separate level.
Yeah,
and
I'd say that.
And I think, so Stephen locks Mark out, sees all that stuff. Again, I thought, like, I know you asked who was the primary, and
it's clear it's Mark.
But like, I thought that was clear before this.
See, that's one of those things where I didn't get to that conclusion until I got to this scene.
I think I know because I'm seeing a lot of people being like, "Oh my goodness, he's realizing he's not real." Like, oh, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." I'm glad that writing worked, but it's kind of just like, yeah, he's not real. I feel like that's been made quite clear, even in the last episode when it's like, "I'm Dr. Stephen Grant." I was like, "Yep." So he made that up. Like, Stephen couldn't have been real.
Yeah.
Sorry, it couldn't be the primary. Steven's a very real soul that are being inside of this body. But I think once you point at, there was a movie where a character was called Stephen Grant. I think that's the obvious thing of, even if you only caught up on that fourth episode of, okay, so then Mark's the primary.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, Stephen's not the primary.
Mm-hmm.
So then he sees that. That is rough stuff.
Oh God, so
we
rough.
Talked about what I didn't understand about that interaction,
mm-hmm. which is something I don't think anyone is going to realize until we put this episode out, because that was such a hard scene that I think people are just like, yep, like including me. I'm like, that just hit me in the feel so hard. Just that whole sequence. That was like, you know, Up, like that first 5-10 minutes of Up screwed up a lot of people. That was what screwed me up a lot. that was a hard episode, like sequence to watch. Yes. And then I got blurred by everything else.
So that's rough. And so then Stephen gets pulled out, and now Stephen is with Harold. This is where you see like diplomas that don't even have school names on them, not even signed and stuff like
that.
They're
phonies.
I really like the way Stephen interacts with Harold. It's more of the stuff I liked from the first episode, like the stuff where he's like, you look like a Ned Flanders, or when he's like, well, Mark lied to you. What did he say? And then he's like, ooh, cheeky, like, or nosy or something like that. And like, I like that he's like, it's what I said, like, Stephen actually is able to maneuver in this space. He's not put off by it. He's not off kill. He's actually able to hold his own in this.
Yeah. Reminds me of like the little Clark Kent things that he'd do. Yeah.
I really liked him in the scene until obviously the ultimate thing of like, okay, I'm going to call Mrs. Grant then. He's like, oh no, don't bother her. And you know that he knows already. But like, yeah, just the way Harold's like, all right, here you go. It's your mom on the phone. And he's like, she's dead. Which another thing where I'm like, I thought everyone just knew that his mom was dead. That's not from the comics, by the way. I don't, as in, I don't remember that being a big thing in the comic run I read. It's just watching the show, I'm like, she's obviously dead. Like, I feel like that's just the thing.
See, I didn't, because Layla was like, you're talking to her again. And because like the death of the mom happened so recently, and like Layla's like he hasn't seen, Layla and Stephen haven't seen each other, or Layla and Mark haven't seen each other for how many months? But it seemed
that shiver, they haven't seen it. It's basically when he turned into Stephen in the street. I was like, oh, I'm lost. She hasn't seen him since then. I'm
Layla? Yes. Really?
Yes.
No, it's been longer than that, hasn't it?
No.
Are you sure?
So I don't, this is, again, I'm at a loss with the show. So people know for a fact, I'm putting this in quotation marks, I love content, know for a fact that is the inciting incident of, I had it under control until recently, and that is where he makes his departure, and that's why she's like, I can't find you. And I'm not, there is no room for no, this is what people are saying, this is it.
No, and you're right, because I was going to say the dad thing, but the dad thing's what brought him to her. Yeah, never mind.
So then they don't see each other since that shit. I don't know how people understand those details, which I don't think are made clear, or even you saying like, it's been a long time. Like, I don't know. I just see memories. I have no concept of when these are taking place in relation to what we saw in the first couple of episodes. I just know it happened before because they're memories, but I don't know. But I'm saying like people are able to make those connections, but they didn't know like the mom died. I'm like, some people have some information I'm just not privy to. I don't, or even with you saying with certainty, like, oh no, like this happened forever. I'm like, dude, that could have happened years ago. That could have happened months ago. I don't know.
Because here's my thing. Like, I anchor a lot of, I guess, the truth of what's going on other characters as opposed to Stephen or Mark, right? Because of what they're doing and what they're going through. So when Layla goes like, I haven't seen you for months, and what you're talking to your mother again, like, it seemed to me like that piece of dialogue that Layla was like, you're talking to your mother again. It's like, wait, she's dead. Like, if she knew about it, you know, like, so to me, it's just like, I had it to control under recently, and if she obviously wasn't there because it showed him outside drinking alone, and, you know, breaking down and not going in alone, all that kind of stuff, right? So to me, it wasn't obvious that she knew that the mother was dead. Well, it wasn't obvious.
If we're going off of what's happened, she wouldn't know anything because Mark doesn't share.
Exactly.
She would hear the sentence, I don't speak to my mother, but that's just it. Like that. I don't think that, obviously he didn't say I have to go, my mom died. I think
He just disappeared, probably.
We've already kind of established, and again, everything's up for debate, but
Yes,
I think the two of us have established
Mhm.
he doesn't share with Layla. That's the benefit of Layla interacting with Steven, is
Yes.
that she actually gets to have insight into what's happening. He
Yeah.
keeps her at a distance, and that
Mhm.
was unclear if that was because of Khonshu or just
Mhm.
he kept her at a distance. But
Mhm.
what I would say is Layla not knowing about the mom makes sense and doesn't really go one way or the other for me, because that would be something that he wouldn't share with her, because that would be being vulnerable and sharing some kind of
True.
trauma he has. I don't think that would be a thing he shares with her.
True. Even if, yeah, he could experience that alone and be like, went into Steven mode for like a day and then went back and it's like, oh, hey, what's going on? And just not updated, because it's like, hey, if you don't talk to your mom and she died, do you really need an update to someone?
I don't know.
It's a weird situation,
I don't
right?
think
You just continue not talking.
I don't think it's as clear cut as people are making.
It's not clear cut. None of it's clear cut. Yeah.
I'm not sure how anyone speaks with certainty on the timelines of any of that. But
one thing is clear. I will say that I called out the mom was the source of the trauma, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't know why I'm so happy about that, but I got something right. That was still rough to see.
Basically, once he's like admitted, okay, yeah, she's dead. I know. They get to the gates of Osiris, and the zombies come, the sand zombies come, and Steven was right. He does have some muscle memory of how to beat people up, because he does a pretty effective job, but then sacrifices himself to save Mark. Goes off the end. We talked about how I feel like that's a weird way to end it, because then the scales balance and he's in the field of reeds, which was the point of the boat ride. So I'm not quite sure why they're like, and so you get the good version of this, and that's where the show ends. Mark standing in the
reeds. The episode ends. Sure. Because I need the final episode. If you say the show, it's too much finality.
Yeah. Sorry, the episode ended.
Yeah.
To me, every episode is just a new show. But yeah, sure. This episode.
I get what you're saying. That instant balancing once he froze up. It's just like, and the fact that there were still the two hearts, not the one heart disappearing all of a sudden. It was weird.
Well,
very weird.
That's that. I think it's not a perfect episode, as we pointed out. I think it's a very strong one. I don't think it's a strong, as I said, my caveat is it's a very strong episode of TV. I don't know if it's a strong episode of this show, only because I don't know how well it fits into what the show seems like it ultimately has to do. Which is get Mark out of there and have Moon Knight fight some people.
Yep.
So there's that.
That's it.
There's that. I think this was a very good exploration of, as you said, how to treat DID.
Yep. But it started to move away from what the DID experience is like,
which I think would be weird to try and replicate, because people are still individuals. So yes, there's probably some overarching things that people would recognize with the idea that are like, oh yeah, that's, but to try and be like, this is the way it feels, would be a hard task to do. But I think that's why I like that you said this is more about the treatment, because I feel like that could be more agreed upon on like the good ways of treating the idea.
Yes. I'm just saying, because like the first two episodes did do a relatively good job of being like, oh, here's the life experiences of someone with DID, not, and then this is now moving into the territory of like, this is how it's treated. But like the conclusion of the episode is just betraying the actual treatment idea, because treatment, not cure, not cure, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for listening, everybody. We'll definitely be back. I think when you're hearing this, it's a Monday, if you're listening the day it comes out. And we will be back on Thursday to do the finale.
Yeah.
And then next Monday, if everything goes
so
right,
much of us.
We'll be doing Multiverse of Madness, which dropped a befuddling commercial that I didn't watch, but I've heard all about. Anyway, I guess they need people to buy more tickets. But so this is Monday, and we'll be back on Thursday. So I hope you enjoy that concept. But we're part
double
of the,
header a week, baby.
Yeah, we're part of the That Shelf Podcast Network. So head on over there. There's shows like this one, Bad Gay Movies, Black Hole Films, Changing Reels, a whole bunch of great shows. You'll see those there at thatshelf.com. If you want to hear older episodes of this, please go to tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten. Our email is spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. Our Twitter is @tdfspoiled. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Radio Public, whole bunch of places. So rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends. And if we're not where you want us to be, please get in touch with us, email, Twitter, and we will fix that. Or just let us know how you're feeling about the show. I would love to hear more people try and clear this up for me, because I think there's some good ideas with a weird bow wrapped around it, trying to be like, no, this is a one cohesive thing, and maybe I'm just not seeing it right.
Yeah, no, I would request that same discussion.
Yeah,
let's do it.
All right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.